I decided, as sort of a celebration to myself, and well, to make up for the lack of content, to do 4 experiences this video. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. When I was 36, having taken some new medication in addition to the antidepressant medication I already took daily, I went to bed and went to sleep. While asleep, I understood that I existed as an entity, separate from my body, and also separate from my surroundings, which were a kind of nothingness. I felt that I was an entity made of energy, which I perceived as beams of light, and I had a profound sense of contentment. I understood from someone else who was there, but like me, existed without a physical body, that my role as a being of energy, only a role which I had when there was to go to other planes of existence and help people cross, in spirit, though that term wasn't used, to another plane. I felt that I would be helping them by doing this. I was sent to another plane and passed through several different planes and realities to reach the person I was to help. She was a Caucasian girl, likely around high school age. I saw her from an angle above her, but not directly above her. She was sitting and talking to friends at a table. I was able to embrace her spirit and move it with me through the planes to the one I had been in previously. This appeared to take more effort than moving through the planes by myself had taken. Throughout the entire experience, I continued to feel a sense of positivity and contentedness. Upon my return to the initial plane, I was spoken to by someone else who was there. I mentally termed them God, as that was the term I knew which was most closely related to what they were, but I was aware that they weren't God, as defined by religion. I am not sure whether I heard them speak the words, but I understood from them that I could stay there and continue to experience what I had been experiencing, feeling a sense of contentedness and helping people pass between the planes. Or I could return to my body. I understood that if I chose not to return, the part of me which existed on Earth would die. Upon considering the possible impact of my death, I chose to return, due to the likely impact my death would have on my parents. At that point, I woke up, though I continued to feel the contented feeling for some time, before making a conscious effort to awaken completely. I felt that I had been taking very shallow breaths and needed to breathe more deeply to wake up properly. I felt like I had experienced an NDE and immediately started researching what had happened to me on the internet. I discovered that the new medication which I had been prescribed could react with the medication I was already on and could lower my heart rate. A medication interaction website indicated that taking the 2 medications together presented a risk of death and that it was inadvisable to take both medications at the same time. I did not do so going forward. I also established that the antidepressant medication I had been on for some time can cause lucid dreams. I had experienced some vivid nightmares upon commencing the use of the antidepressant medication, and this was a known side effect. Although I hadn't previously experienced any vivid positive dreams or any dreams which felt as though they were real, I concluded that it was likely that I had experienced a kind of dream. At that point, I was disappointed, as there was a clear explanation for my experience, and I considered it unlikely that any part of the experience was real. Having mentioned my experience, in passing, to a doctor, the doctor suggested that the choice I was faced with, to die or wake up, may well have been genuine. Accepting that other aspects of the NDE were likely a vivid dream, which I felt was likely to be a consequence of the interactions of the medications I had taken. Although I feel that my experience in general was not real, I did not exist as a being of energy, which I have mentally termed a light being. I think it likely that I was close to death that night, and that if I had chosen that option, I would have died peacefully in my sleep that night, as a consequence of the interaction of the medication I had taken. I found that I was able to return to a feeling that was similar to, though not as strong as, the feeling of positivity I felt on that occasion when I undertook some guided meditation. It may not be of relevance, but I suffer from hypnagogia, so have some issues with sleep, which could perhaps be connected to this incident. That does it for our first experience. Let's move along to our second experience. In 1989, I graduated from nursing school and began working in a hospital. I had a patient that was in isolation with pneumonia. Somehow I contracted the same type of pneumonia, even though I used all necessary precautions. I was sick overnight. I woke up with chills and a fever of 102. I still lived in the nursing dorm, so I woke up another nurse who took me to the hospital across the street. The doctors in the ER admitted me immediately. By the next day, I was running a fever of 104. The highest my fever got was 105.2. I was very sick. I couldn't breathe out of my nose or mouth. The infection control doctor said I had Klebsiella pneumonia, which has a high mortality rate. I was in the hospital for about 2 months. One day I was running fevers of around 104 to 105, couldn't breathe, and just wanted to be out of the sickness. I wanted to get better. I'm an only child, and my mother was told by the doctors that I wasn't improving, even though I was being given massive doses of antibiotics. They even told my mother I would probably die, because I was septic by then. She was screaming, but she's only 23. I don't remember the specific day, but after being sick for 2 months, I remember saying to myself, I just can't take this anymore. I remember hearing the doctors and nurses around my bed in ICU saying, she's not gonna make it. I closed my eyes, and then I was in another realm. No tunnel of light or anything. I was just there. At first, I was slightly confused. Where am I? I was on a path, and I could see hills, green grass, a flowing brook, and a low stone wall. I saw animals of all kinds and lots of flowers. The colors were very vivid, and there are no colors on earth like them. I could hear soft music coming from somewhere, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I saw bearded irises on the path I was on, and I leaned over to smell them. They smelled just like lemonade. All of a sudden, a large golden coach appeared. There were people in it, and the door opened. I got in without any questions. There were no drivers on the coach. In all the NDEs I've read, I've never heard of anyone else mentioning a coach of any kind. Well, we were taken to a mansion. That's the only way I can describe it. And into a very large room with people of all ages, races, etc. The room was round, and there were gold candles on the walls. The walls were a robin's egg blue with gold trim. 2 huge doors were on one side of the room. There were many, many people in this room. All of a sudden, I felt a strong presence behind me. I turned around, and there was my great-grandmother and my grandmother. I grew up in the same house with them, so I knew who they were, but they looked like they were about 17 to 21 years old. My great-grandmother died in 1978 at the age of 100, and my grandmother, whom I was extremely close to, had passed away 3 years before, in 1985. There was no way I could have recognized my great-grandmother, since I had no picture of her when she was 17 in 1895. But I knew them both. They wouldn't let me touch them, but they said I wasn't ready and would see them again someday. About that time, the 2 huge doors opened. Beings appeared that somehow I knew were angels. They wore very bright white and were very tall, about 10 feet or more. I was not frightened by their presence. They began to take groups of people through these doors. I wanted to go, but they said it wasn't my time. I could see a very bright light, and somehow I knew it was God. All of a sudden, everything I ever questioned made sense. I knew instantly we are one with everything. Another thing, everyone spoke, but it was almost like telepathy. I turned around to see my great-grandmother and grandmother, saying I wanted to stay. They said again, "No, you're not ready." And the next thing I know, I was opening my eyes back in ICU. Just like that. I closed my eyes again, wanting so much to go back, but I couldn't. One of the nurses turned around and gasped. She said I was pronounced dead about 20 minutes ago. The doctors could never understand how I recovered, in their words. I knew then I had died, and I got a small glimpse of heaven. It has taken me over 30 years for me to ever tell anyone what I experienced. The first person I told was my husband, and that was after we had been married for years. I was not oxygen deprived, I was not on any narcotics, and I did not dream this. I finally have opened up and told my NDE to others. I use this as an example of what I experienced. Did you wake up this morning and eat breakfast, shower, or maybe drive to work? Did you do those things, or did you dream it? You did. That's what my NDE was. It was very real, very vivid, and beyond wonderful. And to this day, when I lean over to smell an iris, I still smell the scent of lemonade. That does it for the second experience of today's video. Let's move along to the third experience. I experienced a pre-birth event. I recall the following. An older male who was dark in complexion. He was lying in bed and gravely ill. He was surrounded by what I assume was family and a preacher. A young lady, maybe in her early 20s, was holding his hand. She was extremely emotional. He was tapping her hand, stating that everything was going to be all right. I recall him needing her to stop crying and understand what he was saying. He knew he was about to die, but didn't want to leave while she was so distraught. Another young lady, maybe in her mid to late 20s, grabbed a green phone. She was controlling her emotions while telling someone on the other end of the line that they needed to hurry, as he won't survive much longer. The older man continued to try and calm down the young lady holding his hand. All of a sudden, he was above them all, looking down at himself and them. Immediately afterward, everything he'd ever experienced, felt, and thought began to unwind. It started slow, but got faster and faster and faster, and eventually became a streak of light. This streak of light, I've since learned, was a sperm. There were a lot of them, all brightly lit, before turning black, as if they were dying off. It's very difficult to explain, but the consciousness of the older man and my current consciousness either merged or swapped positions. I eventually penetrated what I initially thought was a wall. I was going to hit it, and afterward, splat. Instead, I squeezed through it, as if it was a thick liquid. I saw the embryo, but was communicating with something telepathically. It was telling me I had to enter the embryo, but I got a glimpse of another place and wanted to go there. I was very adamant about not wanting to come back here, but in a very soothing voice, it simply said, "You have to go back." I fought and fought until I found myself back in a biological body. There's a lot more to this. Things most people would find extraordinary, but for me, are simply what this life has been. The above just describes my arrival here. The other events are many and extremely detailed. It would take hours upon hours to try and write it all out, and make sure it makes sense. The reason I am sharing this is that I need to understand how it relates to other things I've learned in these 50 years of existence. I've quietly researched what was that experience, and how have I been able to do the things I've been able to do. My entire life has been affected, for better or worse, by these experiences. Now, for our final experience of the video. I was 2 to 3 months old. I remember finding myself up against the ceiling and looking down at a baby. The baby was lying on its stomach and very unwell. As I looked at the baby, I said unconsciously, "That poor baby is so sick." I felt so much remorse and sadness because the baby felt terrible. It was roasting with fever and couldn't breathe. I looked across the room and saw a glass humidifier emitting steam. I realized the baby had pneumonia. I then had a panoramic vision of the room. The baby wasn't in a nursery, but in a dining room with the table and chairs pushed across the room so the crib could fit. The room had wallpaper with ships on it and olive drab full-length curtains. The room looked out to the front of the house with 2 big windows with bushes in front of them. It was dark and the house was quiet. I realized years later that the baby was me. When I was about 4 years old, I walked into the kitchen of our new house and retold this story to my mother. Everything I had told her was true. I had pneumonia when I was 3 or so months old. They had moved my crib downstairs because the master bedroom was downstairs, and they knew I was seriously ill. I described the room to a T, including the vaporizer that I can still describe. It had a rickrack pattern around it, like Charlie Brown's shirt. My mother asked me several times, "Who told you this?" because we had moved from that house when I was still very young. I remember it now as I remembered it then. It's just as vivid 56 years later. What I remember most was the empathy I had. I was so sad and felt almost guilty that the baby was so sick. As I grew up, febrile seizures were a way of life for me. I would spike a fever and sometimes have seizures. Each time I got sick, and I was sick a lot, that same guilt would spread over me. So odd. That does it for today's video. Before we end, I want to give a special thanks to a few people who have bought me a coffee over the last few months. I want to try to get back to thanking the channel supporters, so without further ado, thank you to Neckel. I wish that this next person had left their name, but I understand why you didn't. So, I will call you someone. Thank you. Thank you to Rachel. That does it for the thank yous. I will be putting together an end screen that shows all of my channel members that will be placed at the end of each video starting next week. I appreciate every one of you. Until next time, stay safe and continue to be blessed.